Hello everybody, it's Michael Hollands once again for Sound of the Movies. Today I have the pleasure to once again be joined by the great Rupert Gregson-Williams. On today's episode, we will discuss his work on Catch-22, Abominable, and Catherine the Great, just to name a few of his recent scores. Welcome back, Rupert.
Hi, good to hear you.
It's great to have you back. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your schedule. If anybody looks up your credits, they will probably realize pretty quickly you have a pretty versatile career. You've scored comedy, superhero films, war films, etc. How difficult is it to avoid being typecast? I'm sure you get offered many films. Do you ever say to yourself or to your agent, well, I have done many films in that genre, I really need to explore something else? How is that usually with you?
Well, it changes over time. I used to get offered and still do a lot of comedies because I'd done all the Adam Sandler films, and there was a point, I guess, before I did The Crown, so whatever 4 or 5 years ago, where I really, really felt I should slow down on the comedies and not do any, because I was going for meetings with people and getting on with them and having something to say about their script. But ultimately it was, but you're the Sandler guy, right? And that's a certain type of film, and I've got a very small, it's a low budget indie drama, and it's about grief. And I'm not sure that you're really the man for that. I've just seen your score for Jack and Jill. So that became a problem for me. As much as I love working with Adam, and the bottom line is that my loyalty is fully with Adam Sandler because he's a mate, and I've just had a lot of fun scoring his movies. But there was a time where it felt like it was hurting me getting on to do dramas, which is what I really wanted to do. So at that point, yes, I turned down some comedies, and I changed my agent actually, and said, this is the sort of movie I want to be doing. And I don't mind. It can be small budget, can be low budget, can be no budget. I just want to get my hands on some serious drama, and the next thing that cropped up for me was The Crown. So that kind of changed things for me a bit. And now, as you say, The Crown and Tarzan and Wonder Woman, Aquaman, and other bits have changed the perception people have of me in the business. I don't know about music fans. Might still have the same perception of me, probably, well deserved. But in the business, I'm with directors and what have you. They know that that I've got a bit of depth in my experience, at least, and so it's worth having a meeting with me. So that's given me some opportunity.
And yes, of course, you've just mentioned some pretty good examples. So, of course, Aquaman, and you forgot to mention Hacksaw Ridge, which we also talked about
Yeah.
the last time we spoke, which I think was a very great opportunity for you to explore this kind of a movie. Also, I think I did mention that the cue called Praying is one of, at least that's just my 2 cents, I think one of the best ones you've ever written for any picture.
Great. Well, that's good to know. You're not the first person who said that. So you do, hopefully if you get to the end of your career and you've written 5 or 6 scenes that people get emotional about, or it means something to them in a movie. I've had that with No Man's Land and Wonder Woman. People get in touch with me quite a lot and say, that makes me tear up, or, duck shoot in The Crown, those sort of things. If you can have a small handful of those, you're lucky if you can do them, really. And it is the projects that enable you to do that. I mean, the first movie I did for Adam was Click, and there was a really emotional piece towards the end that it just gave me an opportunity to write something for him. And I thought, gosh, all films are going to be like this for Adam. And of course, after that, they weren't. There was just this one scene where there's someone running in the rain, and he's dying, and that gave me an opportunity to do something really, really dramatic. And people often bring that one up and say, where can I get that? And I'm only too pleased to send it to them.
Great. Besides being a successful film composer, you've also had the chance to write music for television. And last year, you had collaborated with your brother Harry on the series Catch-22. Could you please elaborate on the scoring process and how you and Harry worked with 3 different directors, one of them being George Clooney?
Well, first of all, Harry and I spent a bit of time with George and talked to him about the characters. I'd seen the movie. Both Harry and I had read the book, and this series was a different take on that subject. So we spoke with George a lot. George has a great understanding and appreciation of jazz and singing. His aunt Rosemary was a fabulous singer, and he had, as it transpired later on in the process, he had a really understanding not just of the content that we wrote, the jazz content, but also of the production side of things. So, when he first heard something that we'd written that was from the jazz, to replace a lot of the jazz or to be in that idiom, he kind of said, "Oh, I really like it to be, to feel less polished." And so we were given the sort of permission to go out and record it mono and stick, the drummer hard over and to the right and the trumpeter sit him in a different room on the left. And that was really good fun. He really appreciated it and heard and could hear that, which which Harry and I both appreciated, George knowing. But anyway, so from the beginning, Harry and I, once we kind of knew what the story was, really, it was the big emotional thrust of the movie, and then the comedy and the sort of increasing craziness. And so we sat down and wrote the theme at the beginning around a piano. I think we did it at Harry's place in Los Angeles, and just sat down on a piano. It's the first time Harry and I had written since we were in our early 20s. So it was kind of interesting, and it was always something we wanted to do. And so it was going to be testing for both of us, because we both have our own ways and what have you. But actually, it was a lot of fun, and Harry was very generous, and I hope I was too, in sort of, jumping up at the appropriate time and letting the other put their ass down, and so it was quite nice in that way. Collaboration of getting the first melody, and then once we had got a basis for the sound. What was interesting also was our critique of each other. It can be awkward when Harry and I have, been our own bosses for. I mean, having said that, we're our own bosses, but then where the boss, our boss is the director or the producer or the film normally, but we're our own boss in the creative. At the beginning, the engine room, when you first get into writing your theme and you're in the lonely place that is your studio, and it's only you who can answer to it. And so it was interesting to hear Harry and I. I've got to be honest, Harry was more honest with me probably than I at first. I think it's probably our natures. Harry is pretty just straightforward. I'm a little bit more diplomatic. So Harry probably had to push a little bit more with me to get some response. But once we got that balance going, it was really nice to get some critique from somebody. I mean, there's somebody who has more empathy for me and I for him than anybody else in the world. We're brothers. We're both composers, and we're both suffering the same sort of issues of, is this good? Is this not? So no big romantic story about the process, apart from we did it around the piano, and lots of discussion, a couple of beers probably, and trying to get down to the honesty of telling each other, actually, thanks for doing that, but I've got a better idea. Finding those balances was quite interesting. Being brothers, being with anybody, but with a brother, it was an interesting process.
I take it you two worked pretty closely on every cue then, or did you kind of decide to divide the individual episodes and the sections after a certain period of time when you were kind of in sync, so to speak?
I think we split it up as we got later on. Once we got past probably the third episode, but at the beginning we collaborated on almost every cue, especially the big emotional ones, and really with Catch-22, if I remember it rightly, it was a little while back, but there was a kind of a big emotional moment that came quite close to the end of every episode, probably in most parts, and those we really did collaborate very closely on. In fact, there's a really big emotional cue at the end, which I won't go into. It has a deeply emotional resonance. I think it is in the last episode for our main character, and we passed off. I think it's an 8-minute cue or something, or a 6-minute cue, something like that. And I wrote the first 2 minutes. Harry wrote the middle, and then I wrote the end. And we somehow squashed them together and critiqued each other. And then he probably took over the front, and then I took out the middle. And it was that was quite an interesting process. But right. the jazz sounds came a little bit later. It was a conversation with George. He had a lot of discs in there, and we were doing the orchestral, emotional score. And by the time we got to the sort of end of Ep 2, we got together with George, and he was just umming and ahhing about really whether some of the energy wouldn't be better if it came from us rather than all these needle drops that he had in there. So we went away and wrote some jazz and some comedy stuff. So we did bass clarinets, bass flutes, bit of clarinet, drums, sax, and trombone, and he began to really love it. And after, I guess, once we got further on into 3, 4, 5, 6, there was a lot more jazz that came from us, and so that was fun. And we did the jazz, we did the orchestral parts in parts of North America, and the jazz in parts of Europe. So it was kind of a world event for us.
Right. I mean, I think the work paid off. I mean, the album is very enjoyable, and I especially love the jazz elements or big band jazz elements which you and Harry came up with. So that was really something, and I hope you two will collaborate more in the future, because I think you are forming a very great team.
Yeah, I hope so too, and so does Harry. It's got to be the right thing. I think next time we'll probably do a movie. The thing with TV is once you get going on the roller coaster, it becomes quite a lot of, obviously you get the creative time. Hopefully we did at the beginning to get the sound and the themes, and to spend some time with George. And but once you're on the roller coaster, or you've got to deliver by the end of this week, and then the end of the next week, yeah. And the joy of it's slightly diminished if you've got two people. So I think with a movie that we had maybe 3 or 4 months on, that would be the next thing we might try.
Yeah, sounds great. Looking forward to it. I would love to talk a little bit about another marvelous score which you wrote for DreamWorks Animation, a film called Abominable, a very catchy, emotional, and also at times very powerful and evocative score. Could you please tell me a bit about your animation scoring process, and whether or not this type of a movie allows you to be more playful and theme driven than the typical live action movie?
Well, generally with animation, it is fun, and you can. I always, maybe it's just all the animations I've done, but there's always a cheeky element. And maybe I'm probably talking to me now, I'm probably just your average Englishman, polite Englishman, whatever. But underneath it, there's a bit of a wicked something, cheekiness, and you always get that from animation. So I love that. I'm actually starting an animation for Netflix right now, and the first thing I'm going to write, just because to get me into it, is the cheeky theme, the sneaking about theme. I just get me in the mood for animation, and there's a bit of joy there. I end up sort of standing up writing it rather than slouching over a deeply emotional theme. I'm actually it enlivens me. So with Abominable, I didn't do that. With Abominable, it was really the violin is the story, the violin and Everest and their connection, and how Yi, the main character, she plays the violin, and she grows up through the process of playing the violin. So that those bits needed to be animated quite early on. So I wrote those probably over a year before the film came out. So we filmed the fiddle player playing, so they animated all the fingers and the up to all the position work and bowing and what have you. So that's nice because you get involved. If you can get really involved with the animators, a year before the film comes out, you feel part of the team, and you get more invested in the story, really, and it becomes part of your life, and you want the best for it. When you meet any production team, a director or producer, they want the best for their movie, and they invite you into their world, and you're there to help them tell the story. But often, you get 2 or 3 months. But with animation, there's something lovely about it. Often there's 2 directors, and the producer is always on hand, and the editor. So you have this sort of lovely teams, and who want the best for the movie. And you feel you feel more invested, and perhaps 10% more of you is found. I don't know. So yeah, I'm doing this Netflix movie, and I'm the release, if the world doesn't, if the world allows it. I've got ages on this, and that's lovely. There's been a song written, and I'm going to write my first themes over the course of the next month or 2 easily. And there's a song I've got to write, and it's just nice to be involved with the team and push the film over the winning line, creatively, and slowly.
Great. I mean, I'm sure, Rupert, that many young and aspiring composers are listening out there, and I'm sure that a project such as Abominable might, present you with very big challenges, and at some point you might even get stuck at writing a specific scene because you feel it's rather tricky, and you just have a writer's block. I don't know if you experience that. I'm sure many artists do. How do you try to work around that if you ever get stuck? Do you try to say, well, let's just work on a different scene? Or do you try to, let's say, just step outside, clear your head, and then come back 1 hour later? How does it usually work for you as an experienced big Hollywood composer?
I tend to try and face the issue. I'm lucky. I have in the past had some block, as we all do, but I generally will try and face up to it. If it means that if I don't sleep, or if what I'll end up doing mostly is stopping as soon as the negative thought comes in, and I feel like it's a slog, or I got to get this done because James, the director, needs this by Monday, and it's now Wednesday. Instead of just panicking and saying this is an issue for me, in the past I would have panicked and just written anything. I would say that the first thing I do now is pick up the phone to James and say and be honest with them and say, I'm having a problem. I need you to tell me what is going on in this scene that I'm missing. Because normally the creative, if you're missing out musically, if you can't find the nugget that is the music, then you're not understanding the story enough, or there's something about the story you're not getting. Because if you get the story, if you get what is happening at this precise moment, presumably scoring that moment becomes easier. It does for me. So now I would make it I would share the problem and collaborate with the director, call them, get them over, and show them what I've written and say, look, I know this is wrong because of this, and I like what you told me about this scene. Tell me again, please. What is it? And get them to support you, because they want, it's often people can think of a director or a producer as them, and they're scary people, but actually really, they've hired you. They like what you do. They want you to be yourself and do your best work. So to collaborate with them, my bit of advice would actually be to collaborate more with the director if you're having a problem with block. And from a technical musical point of view, I have ways. We all have ways that we settle into writing. I often, if it's melodic, I'll write it on the piano first, and then I'll set about it. If it's something that's more action driven or rhythmic, then I'll lay down. I have certain tropes that I head for, as we all do, especially as we get older and more experienced. So the way to do it would be to swap it around. It would be actually to pick up the guitar and write the melody, or to instead of going for your string patch or your string shorts, where you're going to end up sounding like the last film you did, do it on a Celeste. Just change the format of writing. I think a lot of people write with an instrument, and they write, with the piano because they're pianists, or guitarists because they're guitarists. Just changing that up will change the, shape of your hands. My hands they're not as good as they were when I was younger, but, they fall into, if I'm not careful, they'll fall into, shapes, and they'll follow shapes because your brain does that. So try a different instrument, because then, the habits of your hands just wandering into areas that are safe maybe will stop, and you'll do something fresh, and that'll get exciting, and you'll go off at a tangent.
Rupert, when you're working on a film, many artists are being presented a rough cut of the picture, and you see the whole movie more or less. I mean, of course, it's being edited and it's not fully locked. But an animation process usually takes much longer. It takes several years. They, let's say, work on the images constantly. They animate it constantly. And I can assume you were given certain clips up front to get an idea and to start working. But as the film is still incomplete and several elements are still being processed, how do you try to fill in the blanks, so to speak, with your own imagination? How does that fuel your creativity, so to speak?
Well, obviously you'd have the script, and you talk with the team, with the directors. But generally, very very early on, they'll have storyboards, like they will do in live action when they're boarding a film to get an idea of what shots they want, or what scenes they're going to have. But with animation, they'll maybe use a storyboard every 4 or 5 seconds, and then they'll start to fill them in a little bit, so you get an idea. The good thing about the human brain is, if you watch a film that is made up of storyboards that change every 4 or 5 seconds, your brain starts to fill in the gaps, and after watching a film for about 20 minutes, it doesn't become jarring and a bit odd like you're watching bits of artwork. You're imagining the movement. You can't help it. And of course, they maybe put in some temporary score. So early on, you do get you do get that, and then it goes into an animatic, and so it actually becomes like a very bad animation, and so you can see more motion. And as they get, for instance, in Abominable, when with this violin playing, I'm talking about, had to write the music first before they animated it, which was lovely for me and happens rarely. But so I'd write the piece, and we'd discuss the piece, and I'd sort of say, well, I'm going to do this with the tune, and then we get to a climax here, and then it filters off, and so it's going to last about a minute. And they say, great, okay, so I will go and write it, give it to them, and then it's animated, which is lovely. There are other examples of where you could be writing an action scene, or let's say an epic scene, where you just see a little black and white drawing of a guy on the side of a mountain, and you write something, and then it comes back and it's animated, and you realize the depth. It was a POV of an eagle, and you're looking over the whole of the Gobi Desert onto a mountain range, and suddenly the size and scope can change with the way you write it. So you need to go back and reorchestrate it a little bit and make it have a little bit more size, because it looks so 2D, when you first looked at it. I had that a little bit with Aquaman. The last reel was a lot of green and blue screen. But when the battles sort of were finally sort of realized in CGI, which some of them really did, come quite late because there's just so much for them to do, you realize the size of the army that is approaching, and so some of the writing changes.
And now I would love to talk just a little bit about Catherine the Great, a 4-part miniseries directed by Philip Martin, which aired on HBO as a miniseries. Maybe you could tell me a bit about exploring the 18th century setting musically and how you tackled this.
Well, I can tell you that I surprised me. I fairly educated, I guess, in a sort of funny way. But one of the areas I was not clued up on was Russian music at that time. And I was very surprised when I started looking into it that apart from folk music, the Russian classical music really didn't have the style or the romance or the sweep that we know of Russian composers that came after that. You know, your Borodins, Rimsky-Korsakovs, and Tchaikovskys, and so on and so forth. After that, it was much more sounded much more like German and Italian music and French music from that period. Didn't have they had I didn't find much at all that had what I felt was a Russian influence. And I think, funnily enough, Catherine was the kind of the reason for part of that. She brought in philosophy, and she brought in architecture and music from Vienna, and she admired the Italians and the French as well. And musically, the court music was more Western European at that time because of that. And it was only after that that this beautiful romantic use of folk music came in. So that was my first surprise. But then so I went into more of the religious music and the choral music, and that did have that sort of pungent romance that just has the Russians have a certain passion that that a lot of other European countries or that this continent don't have. They have a different type, and I love that because it's sort of a dark sort of dark passion. And so so I explored I used a male voice choir and did some certain things with them. Hopefully that it was effective, that I enjoyed doing it, whether it was or not. So that was fun. So Philip and I worked on The Crown together. And so, and he'd been part of getting me to do that sort of sound with The Crown, and the sort of modernistic way of doing something regal. And so he encouraged me to just have a lot of fun, and I did, and get some great musicians on it, and great choir.
Thank you very much for sharing this with me. And of course, I am looking forward to your future projects. The Netflix film, which you just mentioned, I hope it gets made and gets released. Let's see.
Yeah, well, it'll definitely get made because it's an animation. Yeah. So regardless of what happens in the world, it'll come out, which is great.
Right. And also, I think one of your most recent movies has also been postponed. It is Fatherhood, right?
Yeah. Well, I've written the score literally a couple of weeks away from scoring it. The film has been pushed up, or pulled up rather, to October. So that's maybe a little bit optimistic, but we'll see. But I haven't recorded it yet. So I've written it, and it's not been orchestrated or recorded. So we'll just wait. We're just kind of waiting to see what happens.
Yes.
But it was a great experience working with Paul Weitz. He's a lovely man, and he's got a great film there. Kevin Hart's just he can't help but be funny. He is really funny. The film is funny, yeah. but the subject matter is very moving, and he's great. He really is.
Great. Looking forward to it. I hope it will be released in October. Let's see what happens. And I would like to thank you very much for taking so much time out of your schedule for me again. I really enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as well.
I did. Good to speak to you again.